So the additional modify commands that we're going to cover are trim, extend, and fillet, okay, among others. We'll get into rotating and scaling in the next video. But first we're going to start off with trim. And the trim command allows you to erase parts of objects that are not needed by using other objects as a cutting edge. So this is a different type of command structure than what we have been working with and involves multiple steps. So you're allowed to trim objects individually or a multitude by using our green selection box, which is traditionally known as a fence in AutoCAD. So note that the two sets of selections are not mutually exclusive. Okay, cutting edge objects can be objects to trim as well. So it all depends on how you define the trimming relationships. So what that means is what I need to have is I need to have two intersecting objects in order to use this trim command. So with this rectangle, I can't use the trim command because nothing is intersecting the other. Okay, if I move this inner rectangle, okay, and move it over, you can see that these objects intersect each other, and so now I can use my trim command. Okay, so trim is noted up above, okay, or you can type in trim, or you can type in TR, which is the alias for it. Okay, and again, it's just memorizing these aliases. So what it's asking me is it's asking me to select my objects or select all. Okay, so what if I go back a second, okay, and if I look down at my command line, it's asking me to select my cutting edge. So it's saying, okay, what am I essentially trimming the other object off of? So let's trim this portion out. Okay, so to do so, I need to select a cutting edge, and this edge is essentially my knife edge. Okay, and that's what's going to trim this off. So if I select this object, okay, and again, you don't have to select one object, you can select multiple objects. Okay, again, it's just, you know, kind of keeping in mind what the command is asking you to do. Once I select those objects, I hit enter, and this is getting me into the second step of the command. So now it's asking me to select the object to trim, or, you know, there's other options for it. Okay, but we're just going to select our object to trim, and I'm going to click, and you can see that when I mouse over this part of the object, okay, it changes my cursor, and it changes the visualization of that object, in that it makes it into a gray line, and then it changes my cursor to have a little X next to it, okay, a red X. And so that's another indicator that they've added recently in order to make it visually more obvious that that's what you want to trim. So if that's what I want to trim, then I'm going to click and then hit enter to get out of that, and you can see that it trimmed this object off of this object. Okay, if I want to trim this out, okay, this would be my cutting edge because I want to trim from this point to this point, okay, and this would be the object that I trim. So if I hit enter, I'm going to select my objects, okay, which is my cutting edge, and I'm going to click on that, okay, because again, that's my knife edge, okay, that's what I'm going to trim the other object off of. I'm going to hit enter to get into the next step, which is selecting my object to trim, and I can click on that and then hit enter when I'm done. Okay, now keep in mind when I select these, they're two separate objects, and we'll get into how we can actually reconnect them again. Okay, so that's a bit of a slow way of doing it. Okay, when you start to gain more speed and more comfort with AutoCAD, what you can do is actually, if I type in trim again, I can actually use my green selection box, okay, and I can select everything, okay, as my cutting edges, okay, and this you have to be a little bit careful about because, you know, it can start to come back and, you know, create a little bit more work. However, if I just select everything as my cutting edge and hit enter, I can select these individually, or as I noted, I could actually use my selection tool as this fence and kind of kill some birds with one stone. Okay, no offense to birds. And then hit enter when I'm done. Okay, but in this case, because of the lines, they're always going to be segments. And again, we'll talk about, regrouping them back together again. Okay, so then there's also the extend command. Okay, so say I want to extend these lines to this point. Okay, You know, there is the stretch command, but that's a little bit tedious, okay? And we'll get into that, you know, as we go. However, when we use the extend command, okay, what the extend does is it automatically takes these lines, okay, and so what happens when we use the extend commands is extend command. We can take this line, okay, and we can extend it. However, there's an issue with this line, and this is the issue with the polyline, in that this is one line. So if I type in extend, okay, what this does is it uses, rather than a cutting edge like trim, it uses a boundary edge, okay? And so what it does is it uses this edge as a place to, or the boundary to extend these lines to. So I can select that object, hit enter, and select these edges, but you'll see that it gives me a no sign, okay, next to my cursor. And that's because this is technically one object, okay? What I need to do with the extend command is I need to extend these segments, okay, and I need to extend them to this point. However, it doesn't work with the polyline as it is now here, okay? With the lines, it'll do it. So if I type in extend, click the boundary edge, and again, you can do multiple boundary edges, so I can select two at once or multiples at once and hit enter, and then I can either pick these one by one or again use my fence and select those. Okay, so you know, you can do multiples at once. It doesn't have to be, you know, one at a time. The fillet command, okay, also works in the same way. So well, it works in the same way, but it works differently, okay, in that it meets corners together. So for example, if I take a rectangle, okay, and I'm going to trim out these lines from this rectangle and erase the rectangle, what I have is I have this open corner, okay? So it's a little bit tricky to try to stretch these and to try to get them to connect, okay? So the easiest way of doing that is to type in fillet. Okay, you can type in fillet. The tool button is up here at the top. Okay, or you can type in FI for fillet. Oops, sorry, FI is filter. The hotkey for fillet, if you ever can't figure it out, because there are a ton to remember. It doesn't look like there is one. Okay, if it has it in parentheses, that's what the alias, sorry, is for it. But fillet doesn't have one. And again, you can actually customize these aliases. You know, we're not going to get into that, but there is a way of customizing them too as well. So what the fillet asks is select your first object, which is one edge, and then it'll ask you to select your other object, which is your other edge, and then it'll join the two together. Okay. You can also specify these objects to meet with a rounded edge. So if I undo that by hitting U and enter, okay, and if I type in fillet again, and one of the options is radius, okay, I can specify a radius, let's say 4 for 4 inches, okay. Sometimes if you can't see the radius of, you know, this curve, then either it's too big or too small, okay. So 4 should be okay. So I'm going to hit 4, and I'm going to select one object and another, and you'll see that it meets with this arc segment. Okay, so it's a neat little tool. The one thing you have to remember though is if I erase that, and if I use the tool again, and I want a 90-degree angle, okay, and I don't change my radius back, it's going to keep giving me that. Okay, so that's one of those things with fillet that you have to remember, in that you have to change it back if you want a 90-degree angle. So if I type in fillet, again, go to my radius and type in 0, okay, not giving it a radius. Then when I select my objects, it'll create that 90 degrees. Okay, so again, keep that in the back of your mind that when you're using fillet, if you're using a radius, you always have to change it back.